English in no time. Straightforward strategies for success.
Chapter 1: A Race Against Time. In the heart of a bustling city lived David, a young entrepreneur with big dreams. David had just received the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to pitch his startup idea to a group of international investors. But there was one major obstacle standing in his way. The pitch had to be delivered in flawless English, and David's language skills were far from perfect. The meeting was set for exactly 45 days from today. David sat in his small office, staring at the calendar. "How am I going to learn English well enough in just 45 days?" he muttered. Panic began to creep in, but giving up wasn't an option. He needed a strategy, and he needed it fast. That's when his friend, Sarah, entered the picture. Sarah was a polyglot who had mastered 4 languages in less than 2 years. If anyone could help him learn English in no time, it was her. Chapter 2: The First Conversation with Sarah. David called Sarah the same evening. They met at a cozy cafe, and as soon as Sarah heard about his dilemma, she smiled. "Sarah. David, you're not the first person to be in this situation. I've seen people learn languages in less time than you think if they're smart about how they learn." David leaned in eagerly, desperate for a plan. "David. Okay, tell me how. I need to be fluent, not perfect, but fluent within 45 days. What's the fastest way to do it?" Sarah tapped her fingers on the table, collecting her thoughts. "Sarah. There's no magic, David. But there are methods. And if you follow these strategies every day, you'll surprise yourself. Let's get to work." Chapter 3: Building the Foundation. Sarah pulled out a notepad and began laying out her plan. 1. Focus on communication, not grammar. "Forget about mastering grammar rules right now," Sarah said. "The goal is to communicate effectively. Investors won't care if every sentence is perfect. They care if you can get your message across." 2. Create an immersive environment. Sarah advised David to immerse himself in English for every possible moment. Watch English news every morning, switch your phone to English, and listen to podcasts whenever you can. Surround yourself with the language. 3. Speak daily without fear. "This one's non-negotiable," Sarah said firmly. "You need to speak English every day, even if it's to yourself. Stand in front of a mirror, rehearse your pitch, or talk to English-speaking friends." David nodded, scribbling down notes. It seemed overwhelming, but Sarah's confidence gave him hope. Chapter 4: The First Few Days, a Rocky Start. The first few days were hard. David felt awkward speaking to himself in English, and switching his phone to English only added to his frustration. He struggled with simple phrases, and doubt started to creep in. How am I supposed to pull this off? David thought to himself late one night. But he reminded himself of Sarah's words: progress over perfection. Despite the challenges, he pressed on. He practiced his pitch in front of the mirror, recorded himself speaking, and watched motivational speeches on YouTube. He felt clumsy, but every day was a little better than the last. Chapter 5: Breakthrough Moments. One afternoon, David decided to join an online English-speaking group. It was nerve-wracking at first, but the participants were kind and supportive. After a few sessions, he started feeling more comfortable expressing himself. "Fluency is about confidence," one of the group members told him. If you believe in what you're saying, others will believe it too. That moment stuck with David. He realized that the biggest hurdle wasn't the language itself, it was his fear of failure. The more he practiced, the more his fear began to fade. Chapter 6: The Final Sprint. With just 2 weeks left until the pitch, David's English had improved dramatically. He could deliver most of his pitch without stumbling and even felt comfortable answering follow-up questions. But there was still room for improvement. Sarah decided to introduce him to one final technique. Sarah. David, it's time to learn how to think in English. Right now, you're still translating from your native language in your head, and that slows you down. David was puzzled. How do I think in English? He asked. Sarah. Simple. When you wake up tomorrow, narrate your day in English. Everything you do, think it in English. For example, instead of saying, I need coffee, say, I need to grab a cup of coffee. Make English the language of your thoughts. David took her advice seriously. The next morning, he began narrating his routine in English. At first, it felt unnatural, but by the second day, he found it easier. He was no longer translating, he was thinking directly in English. Chapter 7: The Big Day. Finally, the day of the pitch arrived. David stood outside the conference room, his heart racing. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, fluency isn't perfection, it's connection. As he walked into the room, the investors greeted him warmly. David smiled, took a deep breath, and began his presentation. The words flowed naturally. When he made a small mistake, he didn't panic. Instead, he corrected himself and moved on. The investors listened attentively, nodding in approval. When he finished, they applauded. One of the investors leaned forward and said, "That was impressive. You have a clear vision, and you communicated it brilliantly." David couldn't believe it. He had done it. Chapter 8: The Biggest Lesson. Later that evening, David and Sarah met for coffee to celebrate. David was still in awe of what he had accomplished. David. Sarah, I can't thank you enough. I never thought I could learn this much in such a short time. Sarah smiled. Sarah. You see, David, the biggest lesson here is that success isn't about how much time you have, it's about how you use it. Most people waste years waiting for the perfect time to start learning. But those who act now, even with limited time, always end up ahead. David nodded thoughtfully. Sarah. English, like any other skill, is about consistency and strategy. It's not about cramming information, it's about practicing every day, even in small ways. That's how you build fluency in no time. Chapter 9: A New Chapter Begins. David's pitch was a success, and his startup received the funding it needed. But more than that, he had discovered something even more valuable: the power of learning with intention. He realized that fluency wasn't a distant dream, it was a result of small, consistent actions. With the right strategies, anyone could achieve it. And as David reflected on his journey, he knew one thing for sure: learning in no time is possible when you start today and stay committed. The moral of the story is: the biggest takeaway from David's journey is that time is not the enemy, procrastination is. Success comes not from waiting for the perfect moment, but from making every moment count. If you want to learn English or any skill, start now. You don't need years to become fluent, you just need the right strategies and a commitment to daily practice. Fluency isn't perfection, it's connection. And the sooner you begin, the sooner you'll master it. In life, the key to success is not in having time but in using time wisely.